Per usual, it's quarterly reporting season. First thing I'm going to do is introduce a new member of our team, Jackson Buffard, who will be joining me and Ben. I don't believe he's on the webinar today because he also works. Part of his time is at ACAP, joining the GIS team with us, but also part of his time is with the Penn State Ag Environment Center, a separate center at Penn State. So I wanted to make sure that you all who interact with the GIS team know that we have a new member. He's been working with CACAT previously on sort of our partnerships and whatnot, but he might be interacting with you all somewhat more directly in the future. You all know me, Elaine Hinrichs, and you know Ben Moss, who's on the call right now. Or our team is also supported by Ben Anderson of Spatial IT. I wanted to review the quarterly reporting schedule, just make sure everyone's on the same page per usual. The Q4 2025 quarterly reports are being any replenishment requests from those the SEC has been processing and continuing to process. Q1 2026, the January to March quarterly report, is due on April 15th, upcoming. And I wanted to specifically remind folks that the SEC advances were sent in January and February timeframe for the CSS funds fiscal year 2025, 2026. And so most, if not all, districts should be, as you're submitting your Q1 2026 quarterly report, make sure to include any replenishments, but also if you received that advance, that needs to be recorded for this quarter. And then just the upcoming quarters of Q1 and Q3 of 2026 are going to be pretty crucial for documenting your federal fund spending as the deadlines are coming up for that, which the SEC has shared. Just to give a bit more context before I dive into this, in this webinar, I am going to do a pretty detailed overview of the quarterly report submission process because it's been a while since I've done that. And because I've trained a good number of new staff for districts who are new to the ACAP GIS tool, and I wanted to review this for them. So even though it's detailed, I still will be running through this at a relatively high level. And so if you get to a point where I've said something and glossed over it and you have more questions, feel free to hold those for the end or put them in the chat. Or if it comes up afterwards, feel free to reach out to me or your SEC regional coordinator for more context. All right, first thing, the quarterly report, and what I think is probably the most complicated sections or where I see the most issues come up are the program income and expenses sections. And so both of those really depend on timing. And that's where I've seen like data entry issues come up that folks have reached out to me to help them fix in the past. The real key there is that it's all about what money goes into and out of your district ACAP specific bank account during the report quarter. And so if you're doing more complicated counting where you're reimbursing your general fund or paying for things through another fund and then reimbursing your ACAP bank account, that can get pretty complicated. And so really tracking what's going in and out of the ACAP bank account in that quarter. So the SEC advance field there is what I just mentioned about. This is where you would document the amount of advance received from the State Conservation Commission. And so that in this case, this year is half of your Clean Stream Funds 2025-2026 fiscal year allocation, that 50% advance. And that was in February. The SEC replenishment amount is the amount that the SEC has sent to you as a replenishment of previous year allocations, if available. And I'll discuss a little bit more about how that is calculated. But again, those are the two sort of incomes from the State Conservation Commission that your district is receiving. The interest earned is, of course, just any interest at your district. Depends on the district how you're handling that. Project returns are situations where a farmer does not spend all of the money that the district has paid to them for a contract. And if so, the farmer is sending a check back to the district and then it's becoming income back into your ACAP bank account. It's a deposit. And that documentation is actually entered and submitted in the contract editor for that particular contract, and then it is automatically calculated in the relevant quarter. The other income is more unusual, tends to be stuff like, again, if you maybe having a situation where you're reimbursing one of your programs, like switching money between accounts at the district tends to be pretty unusual, or if you have a situation where you have donations to your ACAP bank account, again, pretty unusual. On the expenses side, again, this is what was paid and left your actual ACAP bank account. So eligible admin and tech assist expenses. Project payments are actually, again, entered in the contract editor and automatically calculated. Any other expenses must be explained in the activity report, which I'll show in a second. And that has to actually be approved by the State Conservation Commission. And I didn't highlight it there, but if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the quarterly report dialog, you'll see a checkbox there that says expenses approved. And that is where the SEC, if they are approving other expenses, that would be noted. And then the other fields in the program expenses are not currently being used. Next section is the balance at the district and then the replenishments. So that ending balance at the district is a really crucial number for you to be checking as you are submitting the quarterly report. You need to make sure that the ending balance at the district on the last day of the quarter matches in the GIS. I would say definitely in your ACAP bank account statement, and then also in your QuickBooks if you have QuickBooks. So those or other sort of financial documentation and accounting paperwork. So that ending balance there needs to match to the penny in order to keep things correct in terms of making the GIS reporting tool and making the documents and the data that gets sent to the SEC be correct, and making it so that you get the correct replenishments as well in the future. If it doesn't match, please do not check the box at the bottom of the report checklist that says balance is verified or submit the quarterly report until we reconcile that. And so if you're having an issue where your ending balance does not match in a quarterly report and you can't figure out why, please reach out, usually first actually to your SEC regional coordinator, ask them for assistance in reviewing the numbers or seeing what's going on there, and then they will pull me in on the tech support side if it's not an issue on your end and something else is going on. And so we've done a lot of work in the past couple of years to help folks who are like, it was obviously really complicated as the ACAP program got up and running and working in the system, and you all were having to transfer from paper quarterly reports to GIS quarterly reports, very complicated. So we do have situations where the ending balances may not match, but we can reconcile them and we can make notes in the activity report of why it doesn't match, and then get to a place in the future where it will match. But that documentation is important. And then, so that's like option number one. It's actually the last option, really. But our primary option is option number one is actually to help you correct the data if needed. And then option number two is if on the GIS side we need to make adjustments, we will then do it. And then again, third option is if we can't address it through data entry or GIS adjustments, we will then document it and help you get to a place where in the future it can match going forward. So that's very crucial. If you have any questions about that, again, reach out to your SEC regional coordinator first. On the replenishment side, I did hit on this because the new section there that's available to you all now going forward is that CSS Funds 2025 replenishment field. And so half of that in Q1 2026, half of your allocation is now held there for replenishment, and half has been sent as an advance. The Harrisburg Funds 2022, 2023, and 2024 replenishment sections all need to be spent by these upcoming deadlines of, my understanding is like December 31st, 2026 is the like complete, everything needs to be out the door, documented, done. So my understanding is this June 30th is really an upcoming time to get the money out as well. Get those replenishments fully processed. And then the state clean stream funds, it was mentioned in the ACAP listserv email for April and early April The State Conservation Commission is working on some plans to get a possible extension for all current state funds that haven't yet been spent. So they're working on that in this year of 2026, and it would be an extension to 2028. But usually we only get 2 years to spend the state funds as they come. And then the amount requested is the replenishment amount that the SEC would send to the district from these available replenishment accounts in Harrisburg, if available. And so if you get to a point where you've spent all of your possible replenishment, spent down the replenishment bank accounts, then you would get to a place where your future replenishment is less than your potential claim. And that's just because this is not actually a reimbursement. This is you get a 50% advance, you spend that, and then you get the rest of the 50%. We can't go above 100%. In the spending status, these advances and replenishments, I did pull some numbers from Q1 2026 here to show that unreported advance is the amount that the SEC processed in January and February, and if you received it, it needs to be documented in the SEC advance field above. And the unreported replenishment is, again, any previous amount requested from previous quarters until you document it and receive it. And so it's possible at times that your unreported replenishments can be sort of held if the SEC is still processing. If you have any questions about that, let us know. But key thing there is that if you are trying to enter an SEC advance up top and it does not match the unreported advance, please let us know. Please let me know so that I can figure out what's going on there. And if, on the other hand, though, you are allowed to submit SEC replenishments up top that are less than unreported replenishments, again, because it's kind of a additional, I don't know, an additive fund there or field. The spending status remaining balances, I wanted to point out to folks here, these, if you hover over these, they also have explanations of what goes into the calculation of those numbers. But key there is that the uncommitted balance at the very bottom of the quarterly report does not account for future admin and tech assist expenses, potential contract amendments, or future contracts at all. And so when you're doing your budgeting at the district for future spending, just note that that uncommitted balance does not account for those numbers. All right, wanted to note here for any new folks on the call that the activity report numbers section is relatively simple. If you have questions about what we're asking for there, ask your SEC regional coordinator. And then there's a longer list of text box questions, and I didn't show all of them in the screenshot. Again, they're pretty self-explanatory, and if you have questions, ask. But of note there is in the case where you are submitting other income or other expenses, in the first tab of the quarterly report, you do need to explain why in the activity report. And then in the labor report, we do want to remind folks that you do need to actually check that. The quarterly report will automatically sort of force you to look at it if you haven't checked that checkbox in the top of the labor report, but do check over the numbers and make sure they're still correct. The Files tab is where you can upload documentation, such as scans of receipts or other documentation of expenses, like bank account statements and QuickBooks as well. And then in the Managers tab, I want to note here, since it's come up a few times in the past couple of years, is if your district is having changes to bank account information or address location, especially if your office is moving addresses, this is where you can check what we have in our current system. This information is used by the state budget office, but if you do have changes, we actually have to change it in the state system first before we can change it in the GIS tool. So you can do that directly with the PA Office of the Budget, but please inform your SEC regional coordinator and then also me when you are ready to update that information in the tool. And then for the submission of the report, I wanted to note first here, again, for any new folks on the call, the district manager or their delegate, assigned delegate, are the folks who can submit the quarterly report. Other folks can enter data, but if you are someone who's working at a district and your district manager would like you to become their delegate, please reach out to me and I can reassign your role to allow you to submit quarterly reports. And then after submission, again, the SEC will do the review of the financial numbers. And again, a note here for new folks is that if needed, the SEC and I can unlock the quarterly report if needed to go back and make fixes after submission. And then we also have a note here that the replenishment processed checkbox at the bottom is a place where when the SEC is done going through the replenishment process and the check is actually sent, where the amount is sent, the deposit is sent, they will document that elsewhere in the GIS tool on their end, and you'll be able to get those updates. So that was a run through of the quarterly report steps. Again, if you have questions, let me know. Now, what I'm going to do is talk a bit more about GIS support, training, and bug fixes and improvements to the suite of ACAP GIS tools. So I've got a rundown here of some of the stats from this quarter of January through March. We did complete 57 tech support and training requests from districts. This doesn't include requests that we get from the State Conservation Commission or that we initiate internally. And then I've also noted here that we had about, the way I track things includes sort of tickets for tech support. And of those, we had multi-step fixes that required like multi-day fixes. That was about 18. So we had a lot of quick fixes, and then we had a smaller number of more complicated fixes. And we also did a lot of improvements to the past practice manager in this quarter. And so that was tracked by about 27 improvement tickets, as well as 16 general improvement tickets. And so these are things that aren't necessarily tech support, but are improvements to the tool or process-related changes that we're making. I wanted to run through some of these updates to the ACAP reporting tool and to the past tools so folks know what we've been working on and are actively working on and then planning to work on in the future. So a lot of this is in the January-February timeframe was related to the Clean Stream Funds fiscal year 2025-2026. We enabled those advances. We also published a new allocation history viewer, which is available in the reports menu at the top of the tool. And so that's for you all at districts to be able to quickly see your allocation history over the years at the district. We also worked on fixing bugs that were impacting multiple districts, including situations where some older contracts, but not all, were having issues saving deliverables data, and we fixed that in February. If you're continuing to have issues with that or seeing missing data for some of your older contracts, please let me know and I'll see if there's anything that I can do to help you get that data back in the tool. But it was pretty limited at that, the impacts to that. We also made some adjustments to the Clean Stream Funds 2025-2026 replenishments balance in the Q1 2026 quarterly reports, which will be also going forward. And this is not something that was an issue on your end at the districts. This was to reconcile some relatively small discrepancies in the SEC funding amounts from 2022 through 2025 that were the federal allocations. Some for just a few districts, about $4 difference, and that was causing a lot of discrepancies that we were running through individually with districts. So we made an adjustment to help prevent that in the future. And then we also fixed a bug that was interfering with saving some engineering costs over 10%. And so those are some of the main bugs that were impacting multiple users in multiple districts. But we also worked on a lot of bugs that were individual to specific districts and specific users, as well as I spent some good time. Well, I'm always spending time with districts doing reconciliation of discrepancies. So that was my focus in March. So I don't have a whole list of those because they were very one-off, but those are kind of in our GIS support stats. And then now in April, I'm turning back to some bugs that are not necessarily impacting required data, but desired data. And that includes some things with contract work sites. There's an intermittent bug going on there. Fillable PDF downloads are working, but there's one or two fields that aren't pulling in the data as desired there. Also, photo uploads are not fully functioning as expected intermittently. And then we also have some data validity strategy improvements that we're planning as well to get going on. a huge focus, as I've mentioned, in this quarter and actually last quarter and the quarter before has been this new GIS tool in the suite of ACAP GIS tools, which is the Past Practice Manager. This is for the practice approval system. So many folks who are ACAP GIS users and district staff doing sort of ag tech and conservation tech work are going through this PASS certification program and using this GIS tool. The rest of you all don't need to use it at this point or necessarily at all in the future if you're a financial person, but I'm going to run through some of the improvements that we've been working on to make sure everyone knows about what's going on with that and future integrations into the reporting tool. So this is a screenshot of like made up data for that, but it describes some of these things that we worked on this winter, including we'd had a lot of bug fixes and improvements in January that we were working on, doing more detailed symbology in February and working on legends. And then in March, before the past stream corridor training, and as well as like right during it, we made a lot of updates to the code, including new package practices for stream corridor, custom styles for practices, which was requested by users, a lot of stuff with buffer creation and delineating watersheds using stream stats, those wide variety of bug fixes. And so that was a huge push. We're now on to our next phase of code updates for the Past Practice Manager. We're actively working on some additional bug fixes and improvements. We heard requests for custom styles for landscape features like buildings that we hadn't previously enabled. We'd enabled it already for practices. And we were also making some small in scope, but large in number improvements to tables and legends. That's part of the overall push for a large number of new tool features for the Past Practice Manager to be launched by mid-June. These include a variety of things for the past barnyard stormwater practices, that upcoming training after that. So we're adding more map layers such as contours, soils, can't even list all the layers that we're planning to add. And then additional watershed delineation functionality to really lay out like land uses within watersheds as well. And enabling spatial data file uploads. There's a longer list of that. If you're interested, feel free to ask me or ask Jake and Kaylee about that. I also wanted to touch on and emphasize the new ACAP GIS user training. That's been something I've been focusing on this winter and will continue to be doing forever. We started this in January. Anytime a new staff person comes on to your district and needs an ACAP GIS user account, they can schedule one-on-one Zoom training with me for about an hour that is an overview of the ACAP GIS reporting tool. In that training, I'll provide them with their actual user accounts and help them log in, show them the basics of that tool. And this is required because we know that the tool's a lot to dive into with the numbers, and it's helpful to have an overview before you jump in. So if you are a new staff person at the district and haven't done the training, please reach out to me. I have this bookings page where you can schedule training on demand. And if you have multiple people at the district who would like to do the training, a combination of experienced and new people, or just if you are hiring multiple people at once, that is also completely possible. In January to March, I have trained so far about 13 users from 8 counties, which has been really helpful. In terms of the conversations I've had with them have been illuminating to me, and I've heard that from them that it has been helpful, which is great. And so I really want to emphasize this to folks. If you are someone who is experienced in the ACAP GIS reporting tool or has had an account for a while, but still just wants like a time frame to review things or to have one-on-one time to ask me detailed questions about stuff, set up a training, or you can also set up a tool support meeting or email me. But certainly for all of you who are already existing users at a district, when you get new staff, they need to be coming to me for this training before they get into the GIS tools. So this is on our support site, the support.agconservation.psu. This is my bookings link there, and under my contact information is a calendar button, and that leads off to my bookings page. The link is also in my email signature, or you can email me directly and I'll help you get set up with that. And then the GIS events calendar at the bottom of the support site also has information on these webinars, quarterly report due dates, as well as my regular open office hours, which I try to do approximately every Tuesday, as well as when past folks are going through sort of mock plan deadlines, I put on more open office hours to have more book time available. So reach out for ACAP GIS support. These are my open office hours, usually 11 to 12, but I sometimes have to switch that based on other meetings and events. You can also call me. You can email the GIS team at acapgissupport.psu.edu, or you can email me directly, and I'll usually loop in that email address for documentation purposes. That email address is usually the best place to email just because me and Ben and Jackson all have access to it. And so if one of us is on vacation, or out sick, we can follow up more easily. And the GIS support site, I wanted to plug this as well, does have tutorial videos and step-by-step instructions, as well as other documents, webinar recordings, etc. And so it is a resource for you all if you have questions, including frequently asked questions there.